Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Zaruhi Aslanyan. I am a senior security architect at Alexandra Institute, where I focus on risk management, AI security, and data privacy. Today, I will introduce the risk assessment process. First, we will look into why risk assessment is increasingly important. And then we will learn how to execute it in practice. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A box, and I will address them during the Q&A session in the end. You can also like the questions, and then I will address the questions with the most likes first. Before we start the presentation, I would like to ask the questions. How familiar are you with cybersecurity risk assessment? You should see soon a poll popping up in front of your windows. Please vote it if you are familiar with the risk assessment very much or somehow, or maybe you are not familiar at all, so that I know who are the participants attending. Thank you for answering the questions. And then I can see already that most of the attendees are somehow familiar. That's good. If you are not familiar, this is why this webinar is holding, so that hopefully in the end you can take next time somehow familiar as well. Thank you for answering. Now, let me see if, yes. Now let us start looking into why risk assessment is increasingly important. I actually have another question for you, and this is more statistical question, which should appear again. What was the average global cost of a data breach in 2024? If you know it, then you click it, or otherwise you just guess it. And this is source is IBM. Was it 135,000 euro, 1.5 million euro, or 4.8 million euro? When you click, you will also see the right answer. Yes, I can see some numbers showing, and majority voting for 1.5 million. No one was for 135,000. Oh yes, some votes are coming. 4.8 million now became the highest. Things are changing. I will wait a few more seconds. The guessing, so far I can see that we have equal percentage for 1.5 million euro and 4.8 million euro. Unfortunately, the right answer is 4.8 million euro, and this is according to IBM's statistics. Last year, we saw big increase compared to the previous years. And one of the reasons for that is because recent years have seen several high-profile cyber attacks that have caused significant damage. For instance, in February 2024, a major US healthcare IT provider fell victim to a ransomware attack. The attackers disrupted operation and stole up to 6 terabytes of data, including personal information, payment details, insurance records, and other sensitive information. Now, this is an example of a malicious attack, but we have all seen also another disruptive case where the root cause was not an attack, but rather an unintended system failure. And that is the CrowdStrike failure that, amongst other things, grounded thousands of airplanes last summer, and that was not fun. Now let's take a step back. We have all seen slides like this many times with the attack example of the big companies. But do they really apply to us? In August 2023, Copenhagen-based cloud host Cloud Nordic experienced a ransomware attack where criminal hackers shut down all systems, including backup nodes. The attack affected websites, email services, and customer sites, and the majority of Cloud Nordic customers lost all data stored in the cloud. Moreover, in June 2024, the Center for Cybersecurity increased the threat level of destructive cyber attacks against Denmark from low to medium. And this is mainly due to the geopolitical situation. What the Cloud Nordic case shows is that really everyone can be targeted, and not only large international corporates, as we saw the attack example in the previous slides. Now, to make things more complicated, there is no such a thing as 100% security, unfortunately. Security is a quantitative game. With unlimited resources, everything can be hacked, even military systems. And equally, protection mechanisms can be accessed, which is a good point. The question is then, what is the right balance between security risks and investment for us in our context? Good. Now we all agree that security is a critical concern, and it is a real one, as we saw with many examples and the statistics. We also agree, hopefully, that there is no such a thing as a 100% secure system. So what should we do then? Should we look into cryptography? Should we ask ChatGPT, Copilot? Should we hire consultants? Well, what I'm here to say is that it starts with us. Before we do any of that, we need to do our homework and assess our risk level and appetite. Before thinking about security implementation, we need to understand what security means to our company, to our business, in our context. And the answer changes from company to company, and it also might change in the same company over the time as things change in the company. And this is why we do risk assessment. We do risk assessment to understand what security means to us now. And yes, sometimes it is also a compliance requirements. That is why we do risk assessment. In general, risk assessment is a powerful tool that can make a significant difference in the success and security of any project or organization. So, to recap on the benefits, risk assessment helps us identify risks and reason about the corresponding countermeasures. And it does this keeping in mind cost consideration. Risk assessment works with any type of risk, whether they are attacks or just failures, the examples that we saw in the beginning. And it is a great aid in a compliance or standardization journey, and mandatory in some industries as well. Now, let us look at how to do a risk assessment in practice. Risk assessment is a part of a larger risk management process. ISO 27005 is our reference for risk assessment, and this high-level picture is built on that. Note that it is a good practice to run risk assessment and review process outcomes regularly. it is not a one-time activity. It is advised to run it once or twice at least per year, and of course when the major changes happens. In the following, we will go through the steps highlighted in the blue box. Each step usually carried on as a workshop, in form of the workshop. And the duration of the workshop varies and might depend also on the complexity of the system under assessment. But first, before going into the risk assessment steps, we need to define the scope of our assessment. So I will start with context establishment step, just give a quick introduction. However, let's look into another question at this point. What do you feel is the most challenging step of the risk assessment process? Many of you replied that you are very familiar or to some extent familiar, so please pick one of the choices. If you are not familiar, it might be difficult for you, but try to get having an idea from the questions. Make one pick. And it might be a case that more than one step is challenging. However, try to identify the most challenging and pick one. Yes, I can see already some results coming in. Identifying potential risk, have some answers, and that is a challenging steps, I agree. And there are some helps, I will come back to that. Analyzing the impact of risk so far is leading, and that's also that also I can see why it can be challenging, because it's a lot depends on our experience. And I will discuss that as well and say how you can make maybe a little easier on that steps. And we're also developing effective mitigation strategies, which I believe a lot also depends on the system, on the company. But we will discuss each step during this presentation, and hopefully some points will be little clearer and give you a little more help when you do risk assessment next time. So before starting the risk assessment process, we need to scope it first. So we look into context establishment step. We define which product, system, or service must be covered by the assessment. When you do risk assessment the first time, it is advisable to start with a small system, small product, and then increase as you go. Another point to discuss is why to do risk assessment. It can be because of the laws, regulations, it can be because a customer requires it, it can be also multiple reasons why we do the risk assessment. Another important thing is to discuss the stakeholders who should be involved in the process, and considering both internal and external stakeholders. And it's not necessary that all stakeholders should be involved through the whole process of the risk assessment. Identifying which steps each stakeholder should be involved, it's good to have it done in advance, so we have that carried out along the process. Defining the risk assessment criteria, such as likelihood and consequences, is also good to do it beforehand. And important also to discuss the risk appetite. What is the risk level that a company is willing to take? And during all these steps, it is important to reflect on the business objectives. When we define the scope of the risk assessment, it's important to reflect it on our business objectives. So now when we define the scope of assessment, we move and do the first step of the risk assessment, which is risk identification. Risk identification step has sub-steps, which are system modeling, asset identification, and threat identification. We will look in each step now separately. Let's start with the system model. Having identified the system, the product that we want to assess, we start identifying the elements that form the system, and we discuss the connection between those elements, those components. We also look into the data that is flowing across different components and the points that data is stored. This step is usually carried out as a workshop where we advise to include diverse group of the stakeholders, both from management profile and the technical profile. This, including two profiles in the workshop, will allow to get the two perspectives on the system, and at the same time will allow to the participants in the workshop to have a common understanding about the system. If you have any diagrams, it is also advisable to bring them to the workshop. However, it's nice to draw from scratch at least the high level diagram so that everyone can participate and everyone can have the same understanding. Once we draw the system architecture, system diagram of our assessing system, then we look into the trust boundaries. We identify where trust relationship between different components exist. Let's now look this step with an example. So as a running example, I'm using IoT door lock system. So there is a door that is controlled by an IoT device that can lock or unlock the door. So now we start looking into the main components of the system, which are IoT door lock, which is the primary hardware installed at the entrance, equipped with a communication model and locking mechanism. Then we have IoT gateway, which is a physical device that acts as a hub to connect the door lock to the cloud to enable seamless communication. Then we have cloud servers, we have IoT application, we have end user, and we have business system. Those are our main components of our system that you can see the picture here. Having these, we look into the trust boundary. Here, one of the trust boundaries that we identify is IoT door lock and IoT gateway. They share a trust boundary as they are part of the same local network. Note that we assume that a gateway is integral part of the system. That's why we have them together. In other setting, it might be that a gateway will be outside of the trust boundary. This is one trust boundary, similar way we think and mark the related trust boundaries. Now, once we draw the model of the system, we move on to the next step and identify the assets. An asset is anything that has value to the organization and which therefore requires protection. This step is carried out again as a workshop, and we advise to include again both business and technical profiles. People with a business understanding describe what data it is that the customers and other stakeholders want, what it will be used for, and what is needed for to create it. At the same time, technical profiles look at what data is in the system. This concerns what is stored in database or file system, data retrieved from external partners, data sent to clients, and so on. So we get from both view and we get to both assets, business and technical. And then we create the list of assets. We try to keep the list of assets abstract. each step of assessment, when you do, it's also possible to go back. For example, when we look here into asset identification and we see that we actually miss something in our system modeling, we go back and update it as well. So it's not that you do one step and that's all you move, but through all the process, you can iterate and go further. When we work with risk management in general, assets can cover many things, from buildings and facilities to employee and knowledge. When working with risk management within cybersecurity, it is useful to think of asset as data, and this is what we do today. So this means for example, laptop or server we don't consider as asset, but the data on the server or on the laptop, yes, we consider it as an asset. Let's look into our example, IoT door lock examples, and identify some of the assets are locking, unlocking commands. This is machine instruction for a door to lock and unlock. Access credential for users, such as password or keys. Access credential for system, it is also asset for us. User data, which is information on users, including the user access control list, and so on. Log data, logs of when a user locks a door or unlocks a door, access to the system, when the user change of access or user's access right has been changed, all this information. This we also consider an asset. Now having the asset, another step is to analyze this asset and to establish the potential impact of an incident on assets. So taking the list of the identified assets from the previous step, for each asset, we assess the impact of having confidentiality, integrity, or availability compromised. Confidentiality means that data is kept confidential from unauthorized individuals. Integrity means that data can only be modified by authorized individuals. And availability means that data is available when needed. And by considering all three elements of the CIA model, we can address the potential impact of a cyber attack. Let's look into our example again. We take an asset, log and unlock commands. So it is a command that causes the door lock to lock or unlock. And this is sent from the cloud solution via IoT gateway to the lock. And we look into the CIA model, evaluated through CIA model. So for confidentiality, data can be used to conclude when a person is at home or left the building. And this is not so desirable. With each of the evaluation, we give a scoring as well from 1 to 4. When 1 is low, 4 is high. In this case, we give it score 3 because it's not desirable, but it's not so catastrophic. Integrity. If data can be manipulated, the function of log can be affected. And this is something that we don't want. This is important to know. Manipulate the data. So we give a score 4. In a similar way, we evaluate availability. If the commands can be blocked, the lock will not work. And that's we don't want. So that's why we have a high score here as well. Now we have system model. Based on that, we identify our assets and we analyze it. Then we move on to threat identification and start identifying the threats to other systems. We take a base system modeling, and first we advise to start looking into the data flowing across trust boundaries. Security vulnerabilities usually exist on the boundary between different systems due to them having different trust relationships. And that's the reason why it is a good practice to start looking into data flow across trust boundaries. Start identifying the threats for these elements and interactions by asking what can go wrong when an external entity interacts with the components in our system. And this will reveal important and critical threats. Then we move on within the trust boundary, within our system, and start asking the same question. And this will help us to identify internal threats as well. This step can be challenging because while brainstorming, we a lot of time rely on our experience, on our knowledge. And when we do it first time, that might not be so easy to do if we don't have experience. Luckily, there are some materials that can help. Those are threat catalogs. The threat catalogs are a list of assets available on the net, and in the slides there are two links to the two threat catalogs that can help to look through and see which threats are related to us and get inspiration from this list. The minus with these threat catalogs is that often they are either too generic, covering a lot of threads, so it might take a long time to go through all the threads and to identify which is relevant for my case, or they are too specific, too narrow to the scenario. However, I still will advise, if you are doing a risk assessment the first time, have a look at them. It will help to start the conversation. Let's look into the example of IoT door lock. Taking the system architecture diagram, we start identifying the threads. And here you can see three identified threads, such as eavesdropping on the log communication, user sending unauthorized commands to the log maliciously or not, and jamming the signal to prevent log operation. Now, at the end of this step, we have a long list of identified threats. What we do? We start analyzing them so that we can prioritize. So for each identified threats, we define likelihood, how likely it is that an attacker can exploit the threat, and impact. What is the impact on the system if the threat to be exploited? Having these two numbers, using a risk matrix as shown in the slides, we calculate the risk of the threat. In this way, we can rank threats and make sure we focus on the most important threats first. There are many ways of defining values for likelihood and impact. You can see in the slides we are using very low to very high for impact and very unlikely to very likely for likelihood. This can be again challenging. So when we are thinking about likelihood, sometimes we need to also consider what existing mitigation strategy we already have in the system, because that might affect our likelihood. When we think about the impact, here where you can get help from the asset analysis. So when you look into the threat and see which assets these threats affect, and then making this link and looking, okay, I have this threat affecting the following asset, and for this asset I have analyzed through the CIA and gave some scoring, then this scoring can be linked to the impact as well. And this way it can help you to give a value for the impact as well. It is interesting how in the organization we split the roles for estimating these values. Typically, business roles estimate the impact, while technical roles define the likelihood. And this is why it is critical to run risk assessment as a workshop where we include both profiles, where all perspectives are factored in. Let us look into the example as well. So we have identified threats. For each threat, we define likelihood, impact, as you can see in the slides, and then using the risk matrix, we calculate the risk score, and we get the prioritized list of threats, which will help us to focus our resources on the threats with a high risk score first. And that's the next step. So having prioritized list of threats, we move on to the last step of the risk assessment, risk evaluation. I will quickly mention also risk treatment just to give you the full, complete overview of the risk management as well. So taking the prioritized list of threats, we now evaluate them until we identify which of them is important to address first. And here where our defined risk appetite that we did in the context establishment step comes into a role. Based on our risk appetite, we decide which step is falling out of our risk appetite, which step is falling in our risk appetite, and we take the part of the risk that we think that it is important to consider the first, and the rest of the risk we accept for now. Maybe we accept with some condition. That can also be an option. So now that's the risk evaluation step. And then having identified the top risks that we want to address, we move on into the risk treatment. There are 4 strategies for each threat. We can accept it, and in this case it is advisable to make contingency plan. We can avoid it when we eliminate the cause of the risk. We can mitigate it by doing some providing some countermeasures, and in such a way that it is reducing probability or impact of the risks. And we can also transfer it to the third party. For example, if we have a third party IT provider, some of the risk can be transferred to them. It is a good practice also to assign a threat responsible with each threat, and this will make sure that they continue the process. If it is mitigation, so mitigation is carried and so on. If it is accepted, we might accept with some conditions, so the threat responsible will make sure that the contingency plan has been made and keep an eye on the condition. So now we went through all the steps of the risk assessment and touched also the risk management steps. The first 2 steps is system dependent, and we as an organization are the main experts as we have knowledge about our system. The other parts, we can find some helps that can boost the conversation. For example, threat catalogs, they are mentioned. There are also other information about countermeasures that one can find available on the web. Now it's again a question time. I will launch. I would like to get a little information about risk assessment in your company. Are you doing it? Do you know it, but you are not started yet? Or this is not something that is relevant for you at all? And I can see that I'm happy to see that there's 0 for doesn't feel relevant. And we have actually equal percentage that we do it already and we will like to try. Those are for me very good positive answers, both of them. So if you are doing it but you need some more help, or if you would like to try but you don't know where to start, at Alexandra we have extensive experience with running risk assessment in a workshop form, and we can support you in your journey. You can reach out to me directly or through the link posted on the website, on the slides. Moreover, we have other resources as well. You can request 30 minutes pairing session on risk assessment, or we have other tools as well within Security by Design that you can look into the website as well. Now, we can open the Q&A session and look at some questions, unless I did an amazing job and you have none. Let me check. So far, there's no question. Did I do an amazing job? Let's wait a little. You can type your questions if you have. You are also welcome to reach out to us after the presentation. The presentation will be shared with you with all the relevant information as well. Still no question. No? No question is coming. I will wait 1 minute in case it takes some time for you to type, but otherwise, thank you very much for joining this webinar, and feel free to reach out to us if you need any further information or any questions you have.